Jim, many thanks.
The time is now 6 minutes to 9.
And what is the connection between this?
If everybody had an ocean across the USA,
And
then everybody
this.
It's you, it's all for you, everything I do.
Well, the answer, obviously, is the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson, who has provoked an enormous storm amongst his fans by doing something, well, you could say a bit different, really. He's planning to collaborate, or is collaborating, maybe, with contemporary musicians, including Lana Del Rey, you just heard there, Zooey Deschanel, and Frank Ocean. And you may or may not know a great deal about their work. Tim Chipping is a very long-time Beach Boys fan. He's also music editor of the entertainment website Holy Moly. And Mandy Miles has been a fan of them, well, since she was 5 years old. She's one of the original Blue Borders. I'm not sure what a Blue Border is, Mandy. What is it? You're married to a member of the tribute act, aren't you?
Well, he's my long-term friend.
Oh, right. Okay. So they told me you were married. Never mind. Anyway, what is a Blue Border? You need to tell me that.
Well, a Blue Border was a fan that used to be on Brian Wilson's website. Now, Brian called us Blue Borders because the board used to be blue.
Oh, right.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. All right, now look, let's talk about this very serious matter of Brian Wilson dealing with doing stuff with other musicians. Tim, you're offended by this.
I'm not as much offended as I am.
You've got to be angry.
Baffled. I understand why the fans are angry. This announcement that he's working with people like Lana Del Rey, Frank Ocean, Zooey Deschanel, it comes after we've heard so many different stories coming from the Brian Wilson camp of what album he's currently working on. There's been an orchestral sort of suite that sounded really fantastic. There was an album with 3 original members of the Beach Boys. He's constantly talks about wanting to make a rock and roll album, and then out of the blue comes
What's wrong
this.
with that?
Dissolve. Those all sound great. This sounds like a big mistake. This reminds me of when Bono from U2 duetted with Frank Sinatra, which was a hideous crime. And Brian's music.
And listen, just on this one, if you like Bono and you like Frank Sinatra and I suppose Sinatra decided.
I don't want to meet that person.
You don't. You mean you're not allowed to like the two of them?
I think it's unlikely, but I think the problem here is that Brian's music has always been very, very precious and pure and special. People who love Brian's music know that he has always been apart from other artists. The idea of him working with these pop artists who are all good in their own right, it's like a diluting of what he does.
Really?
I think that's why fans are really angry.
Hang on, let's just check with Mandy. Are you very angry, Mandy?
No, I'm not.
You're not? Why?
Not at all. Because Brian has worked with other artists before. He's been... other of his albums have been called dicey, like Smile. Smile was a no-no when it was done, but it was released later on, and it was a huge success.
So in other words, we'll get used to anything.
Well, no, not that. I mean, his fans will support him if he's doing what's in his heart. We like him because he puts his heart into his music.
There you are.
If he's happy with what he's doing, then we should be happy. I mean, we haven't even heard it yet, so I think before everyone starts debating, we need to hear what he's got for us.
Well, exactly. You're being a bit previous, Tim.
I think we've got previous experience. I mean, I brings to mind the memories of an early 90s album that remains unreleased called Sweet Insanity, which featured one of the worst examples of someone trying to use sampling technology, and a song which included Bob Dylan, where he was only allowed one line, and he rasped the line in the most extraordinary voice, and it's ridiculous. You can find it in certain places
But
online.
it was never released, so it doesn't matter.
I doubt very much we'll hear
matter?
this record. Well, it does when you've got someone who's as great as Brian, and the Beach Boys got back together a couple of years ago, and you were reminded of what an incredibly important group they were. And yes, sure, if he's doing what's in his heart, but I think the mixed messages that come from the Brian camp suggest that I don't really think Brian knows who Lana Del Rey is.
But again, does that matter? I can remember, I can't pretend to be an expert in this field, but I do remember when the Beatles disappeared, when they were no more, and Paul McCartney did some solo stuff, and people said, absolute rubbish, absolute garbage, and now look at him.
True. Brian will continue to make music, I'm sure, but this just doesn't sound like it's going to be a classic.
But it doesn't have to be, does it? But I tell you what, Mandy, if it isn't a classic, hasn't he kind of sold the brand, as it were. I know you don't think of it as a brand, but you know what I mean. Everything he does has to be of a very high standard, really, doesn't it? That's the point Tim's making. And isn't that true? Otherwise, the legend dies a bit.
Well, Brian is quite a perfectionist. I mean, I know some of the band very well and some of the ones that have been working with him on this collaboration. And they said he's very happy with what he's doing, and they're happy with it as well. And if they weren't happy, Brian would accept their input on this.
Yeah, well, there we are. We could talk for hours, but we can't run out of time. Thanks, both Mandy Miles and Tim Chipping. Thank you both.
And just before we go, just let you know, you can see Mr. Whippy on our Facebook page.
Oh, Mr. Whippy.
Mr. Whippy. That's Evan's dog, who can tell the results of the football. Our editors,
Possibly.
Jatinder Sidhu and Adam Kamiski. Good morning. BBC News at 9 o'clock. Islamist